It's a dangerous podcast.
Dangerous means likely to cause problems or to have adverse consequences.
Dangerous. It's a dangerous podcast.
I cannot be dangerous.
Of course I'm dangerous.
I am the danger.
Dangerous. I don't like you because you're dangerous. That's right, I am dangerous.
Welcome to the Dangerous Podcast, Living Dangerous Edition, Episode 1. Today we focus on COVID and the effect that it had on my wife.
My name is Amanda Howell, and I've been an RN for almost 7 years now.
This virus is spreading rapidly in China, and U.S. officials are very worried that it could come here. China has more than 200 confirmed cases of coronavirus.
Growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus officially hitting the U.S. Here's what we know.
It comes from China,
Where the outbreak began. The World Health Organization is holding an emergency meeting right now. Officials now say more than 400 people have been sickened and 9 people have died. A Washington state resident fell ill after returning from Wuhan, China.
He will remain in isolation for at least the next couple of days. They will continue to monitor him as well as the healthcare providers and patients he came into contact with after testing positive for the coronavirus.
What we know is that it's spreading. That
if the virus turns out to be readily transmissible from human to human, then we'll have a much larger problem on our hands.
I currently work at a hospital on a PCU step-down unit in the Denver area. I believe it was March of 2020 that the first case actually went out on the news in Colorado that someone had COVID-19. I think that the news put out so many details about the virus and how many more have been infected from coast to coast and all the large cities and how people are getting sick, but no actual information about the virus itself because there was not that much known. And as an RN working in the hospital, working with people all the time and being in close contact with people, it was so frightening and the news didn't help. So I actually had to stop watching any type of news information because it was just becoming overwhelming. And I think so many people can agree that the fear level was just through the roof and everything had to do with COVID after that, just nonstop.
Joining me now, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Chief Medical Advisor to President Biden, also the Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
Getting tested, for example. Tests are widely available right now.
I'm quite concerned at states and people who don't get vaccinated, Chris. The situation is so clear, the data affirm. If you get vaccinated, you are protected, even with the Delta variant.
in many ways, they're heroes. And if you look at what's happening with our medical professionals, it's a danger. They're warriors. Men and women are doing a job that the likes of which I don't think anyone's ever seen.
Being a nurse, I think the most important thing that we could do was to be a sign of strength, like a pillar that people can lean on in times of crisis. And the fact that we didn't have enough information ourselves and we weren't being protected ourselves as we should have been right from the beginning, it was very difficult to take care of patients. I picked up immediately from the beginning on how quickly the virus spread that had to be airborne. It honestly reminded me of the movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman and how quickly it was being spread person to person and how sick everybody was getting so quickly that a regular mask that we would normally wear for droplet precaution was not going to protect anybody. The biggest issues in the hospital at the time were just doctors and staff not knowing how to treat the patients, because it wasn't just COVID, it wasn't just respiratory, it was the other issues that it was causing too, for example, cardiac. And the amount of patients that died in the beginning were mostly intubated and they were unable to be extubated due to losing the capacity to breathe on their own.
The good news is that we have the capability and the tools to address it, and we just need to utilize those tools. For example, getting vaccinated if you're not primarily vaccinated. If you're due for a booster, use a booster. And when you're in an area where you have a high dynamic of infection, and we're not talking about mandating anything, but we're saying recommending people when they are in indoor congregate settings to wear a mask.
And we did our part. You know, we wore the mask. We did the national shutdown, which now, I mean, in retrospect, looks deeply problematic as a policy choice. and we refuse to learn. We're going to do it again.
I honestly believe that quarantining was a good idea in the sense that we would all stay in at the same time for a shorter duration than what it actually was. And if we could have all come together to do it exactly how it should have been done, that would have been something very positive, and I think would have cut back on a lot of losses. Working in the hospital on the COVID units, we get to worry about having enough equipment, having enough PPE. Sometimes we did reuse the same mask. And even today, we still have COVID patients on our unit often. And the same with reusing our masks, we still have to do it. The most traumatic things that the nurse have to deal with can be taking care of a dying or sick patient. We often go through so much trauma. Most of the time, we don't really talk about it, especially with people who are non-medical or families, because they will truly never understand how many dead bodies we've had to clean up and prepare so that families can come in to say goodbye if they did get to come in at all. And the fact that it becomes almost a normal shift where you don't even think about it anymore. It's a routine because it's happened so many times that you just wonder if you even have feelings anymore, or if you've just become so good at closing that door and shutting that off and just bearing them. And the worst part is probably the guilt that you feel, even though you could have done everything possible, everything that you can for that patient. It's still the fact that you go back in your mind and replay everything over and over again to see if there's anything that you missed that could have saved someone's life. And somehow nurses are supposed to go on with their day and deal with this trauma privately so that they can still be a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, and somehow live a normal life and appear normal and be normal. But in their mind, they're always thinking about work and the stress of that. I myself don't often talk about work when I am home because I truly don't want to think about it until I have to go back there. And it's not that most nurses don't enjoy being a nurse or love taking care of people. It's just because they're just so tired. And that's what the pandemic did. It burned so many nurses out that so many of them are leaving the profession altogether or just finding jobs outside of the hospital.
Healthcare workers are burning out.
Traveling healthcare workers could help fill the gap, but they are in high demand, i.e. expensive.
I'm worried about the loss of nurses.
So our issue now is staffing and being able to keep nurses and patient care techs and any other staff members in the hospital because of those years that we had to deal with. It's just so traumatizing that no one really wants to do it anymore.
Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Vaccines block you from getting and giving the virus.
Yeah, by the way, the data tend to support the notion that natural immunity may be actually much more durable than vaccine-driven immunity.
So important for the society to get these people fully vaccinated. But there's going to be a fight breaking out. He said there's going to be a brother-on-brother fight breaking out over this stuff because people are scared, but they've also stopped trusting the establishment.
You're okay. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
When the vaccines first came out, I think everyone thought that it was going to be a godsend and be totally great. It was going to protect us from COVID. We weren't going to get sick. But the reality was, like any vaccine, even if you get a vaccine, you can still become sick, just not as sick as if you didn't have the vaccine. So for people to understand that, I think there was some fake news put out there that if you got the vaccine, you weren't going to get sick. And this was completely 100% not the case. So having these false claims out there about getting the vaccine and calling people's names and just, making people who are unvaccinated feel like they're outsiders and kind of shunning them, that was, to me, pretty extreme. Being a medical professional, I do have my own concerns about the vaccine, especially since it hasn't been tested for years to see what prolonged issues we were going to have after we've been vaccinated. So a lot of the hospitals require their staff to be vaccinated, unfortunately, but the issue is now what's going to happen to us in the future, down the road where we're going to develop some odd, strange diseases that shouldn't have been, all because we did have to get vaccinated. And from my own experience in the hospital, following the vaccines that had come out, we did see a spike in young male adults coming in with cardiac issues. A lot of times they had endocarditis or cardiomegaly, so they'd have to have certain type of tests to see if there was any type of cardiac deformity or blockages in their vessels of the heart, which was very common post-vaccine.
The COVID-19 pandemic that hit the world in early 2020 has no plans of leaving us all soon, as most of the world is currently easing its COVID-19 restrictions.
The coronavirus pandemic, that would be the virus itself and our government's response to it, turns out to have been the single most destructive event to take place in the United States in our lifetime.
Moving forward from the pandemic, I really do worry about just nursing in general and even just all of healthcare, even doctors. There's such a shortage of doctors as well. No one ever really talks about the percentage of doctors and nurses and the medical staff who do suffer from depression and anxiety, PTSD, actual suicide. So our numbers are pretty comparable to people who've been to war. And I really think that the government should start focusing on what they're going to do about health concerns. Who is going to be taking care of these people when they're actually sick and need medical attention and they're coming to the hospital? Oftentimes we are on divert. There's so many hospitals in Denver that are usually on divert, especially on weekends, because they're so full and they do not have enough nursing staff to take care of the patients on the floor. So they hold these patients in the ER. And currently in the news, I've seen so many strikes going on in all different states trying to bring forth nursing mandates where we have safe ratios so that we can actually take care of our patients and save lives when we need to. Truthfully, I don't believe that the pandemic destroyed nursing and our whole healthcare. I honestly think that there was something flawed already that most people either didn't know about, didn't talk about, they didn't shed light on it, and now it's all coming out because I feel like the pandemic has just pushed it to the brink of its breaking point and now there's no stopping it. Moving forward, I often worry about the future of nursing and the healthcare system, but then I think about the times pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, and the reasons why I became a nurse. And even though we all may have different reasons why we originally got into nursing, I do believe that we have one similar intent: to take care of our patients, to be there for people when they need us most in their times of illness and pain and suffering. We care for them no matter what the cost, and we will continue to show up.
Shout out to all the nurses and healthcare workers out there. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Living Dangerous on the Dangerous Podcast. Fuck COVID.
Нет.